Hello everyone. Welcome to the lecture on sickness and later life in media. This lecture is a part of your paper on media and margins. In this lecture, we will try to understand the concepts of sickness and later life and how this understanding is reflected and represented in modern media. Although there is a tendency to think of sickness, health and later life aging as a biological, we need to accept that it is also a social and cultural, as it involves various social and subjective experiences as well. In today, a consumerist society, the modern media has a very important role to play, because the ideas and notions of good and bad, health, young and elder persons, etc. is constantly reproduced, and we adhere to aspire to the norms represented by it. We shall look at the relationship between sickness, later life and media by trying to analyze the foundational concepts of body, health, aging and public sphere. With the help of various examples from past literature, the differences and hierarchy that exist in our society as a result of conflicting notions of health, sickness and aging process will be discussed in this lecture. Therefore, in this lecture you will learn and develop ideas about the sociological understanding of human body, old age and health related issues, issues of aging and ageism in global world, the notion of body image and its relation with media, the impact and role of various forms of media and its portrayals of these issues. Media representations as simply more than reflecting reality and how it represents or to actually create a new reality. Before we begin to analyze the concept of sickness and later life, it needs to be understood that neither represent a homogeneous experience. There are different types of health conditions which can further vary depending on age, sex, gender, culture, race, etc. And similarly, there are different experience and understanding of old age in different society. They include diverse categories representing different cultures, class, divisions, sexual orientations, state and welfare policies, schemes, etc. In addition, through these diversities, we can link both sickness and aging to social inequalities, and how societies deal with the two issues can be clearly demonstrated through how its media deals with it. Let us begin with the representation of health, sickness and disease. The WHO defines health as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being. It gives us important insight into how a society or a nation functions. Standards and notions of health can differ from society to society, and sometimes it is often equated with morality. This is true especially in case of mental health and sexually linked diseases, and there are cultural standards set for it which is constantly changing with forces of society and technological advancement. Related to this is the idea of human body, where the natural and social come together most explicitly. Because we work on our bodies in a variety of ways through certain kinds of diets, clothing, modifications and fitness routines, etc. It has become in a way an extension of the global consumer society. What our ideas are of a good and healthy body is ultimately reflected in what choices we make when we buy or consume products, as well how much of our body has to be repaired. This is where medicine, health sectors, state welfare, infrastructures and policies have a big role to play. We all know about the striking differences in health in high-income versus low-income societies. For instance, WHO report 2003 have shown how Africa, with almost 6 million in 2002, suffered the highest case of parasitic and bacterial infection related deaths, whereas Europe, with almost 5 million in the same year, had highest case of cardiovascular diseases related death. Distinction should always be made between physical and mental health, and by extension, physical ill health and mental ill health. Physical health has most times a clear-cut identifiable symptoms reflecting biological pathology, whereas the mental health is more difficult to diagnose and more likely to reflect mood, behavioral, and personality disorders. It is also argued that most mental ill health is chronic and less curable. Societal perceptions aside, these distinctions are important as healthcare systems around the world address them both differently, and this formalization of their treatments is a result of modernity. The opposite of health could be understood as the condition of ill health, which can be defined in multiple ways: sickness, illness, or disease. Although they are related, there is an underlying difference between the concept of sickness, illness, and disease. They are often used interchangeably, but it is important to understand how one is different from the other. In the medical world, the practitioners distinguish disease from illness and sickness. A disease is a condition diagnosed by a medical expert as some form of biological pathology through systematic diagnostic guidelines. In studies of health, illness has been broadly defined as the state of ill health identified with a person by themselves or a practitioner. In certain cases, this may denote only minor problems, but in other form of illness, whether self-identified or not, might include severe or acute health problems and afflictions. This could extend to a state where an individual's ability to lead a regular life becomes limited. It may also include identifiable somatic symptoms reflecting underlying biological pathology. In medical anthropology, illness is a feeling of not being normal and healthy. Again, it may or may not be due to infliction of diseases such as simple nausea, headaches. This gets even more complicated when explaining mental ill health. Abnormal states of mind may be indicators of minority, immoral or illegal desires which are not sick desires. Sickness is related to a phenomena distinct from disease and illness, namely the social role a person with illness assumes or is given within a social group. It is thus the social and public component of ill health. According to Richard K. Thomas, illness is transformed into sickness when the condition becomes publicly known through announcement by the infected party. Thus, while illness is primarily a biological state, sickness is a social state. And this social aspect of sickness is significant as it has ramifications on social role performance and social interactions. Sociologist Dalcott Parsons developed the concept of sick role to denote this relation between the sick party and their rights and obligations. Parsons' perception of sick as sanctioned deviance, a not productive member of society who disturbs this structure, is highly relevant to our perception of good health. Aging, later life, and ageism. We now come to our second pertinent topic, the issue of later life. Aging is to be understood both as a biological and mental process where one experiences various physiological and psychological changes, as well as a subjective and social process where people negotiate, make sense of these developments and the societal norms and ideas associated with them. This focus on aging or aging population is a result of demographic transition, especially in modern industrial societies with a massive increase in elderly population. This trend is the result of decreasing fertility rate leading to decline in the proportion of the young and decreasing mortality rate leading to longer life. Aging, after all, is universal, continuous, inevitable, and irreversible. Thus, in terms of physicality and psychological, it involves increasing susceptibility to physical decay with vital functioning of organs in decline, thereby making the person vulnerable to ultimate death, as well reduced sensory and emotive process. Before looking into the social implications of this biological process, we need to briefly look at how the aged represents an open category. It is difficult to define who are the aged or old or elderly. WHO in 1967 defined old age as the period of life when impairment of mental and physical function becomes increasingly manifest by comparison with previous periods of life. What is considered old age varies thus between countries because of different social, economic, and historical situations and conditions. The broad division of human lifespan is infancy, toddler, childhood, adolescence, young adult, prime adulthood, middle age, and finally the old age. Defining it in terms of official administrative standards could be a practical way. The average age of retirement in most countries is 60 to 65 years, after which one becomes a senior citizen. But to group anyone in their 60s and above in this same category is problematic. In case of India and perhaps non-literate population, for instance, because the majority of the elderly, especially elderly women, have not gone to school and often do not know their chronological age, such tools becomes close to obsolete. If we were to consider in terms of life activities as well, aged still remains a heterogeneous category. Peter Leslett in 1996 makes a further division of the last stage, third stage, a period of life free from parenting and paid work, when a more active, independent life is achieved, and fourth and final age, an age of eventual dependence. The former indicates a younger old who enjoy financial security and good health, are typically more independent, while the latter constitutes the older who become more dependent due to financial and health issues. WHO World Report on Aging and Health 2015 states that one consequence of this rigid framing of the life course is that the extra years that result from longevity are often considered as simply extending the period of retirement, dependency, and non-productivity. And this often results in formation of negative attitude towards the group. The differential treatment on the basis of age is termed as ageism. While it can be targeted towards individuals of any age, two groups that are often targeted are the young and the elderly, and especially through prejudice-induced stereotypes, discriminatory practices, or institutional policies and practices that enable these beliefs. This has serious consequences both for elder people and society at large. It can be a major barrier to developing good policies because it steers policy options in limited directions. It may also seriously impact the quality of health and social care that older people receive, as stated in WHO World Report on Aging and Health in 2015. Representations in media. We live today increasingly in and through media. What is significant is how new media technologies have a distinct role in many of our daily activities. Besides relying on the media as our main source of information, we also develop new ideas, attitudes, and aspirations, shape our existing culture and customs, and fashion new norms and reality through it. The human history, as we know, has gone through different stages of communication, from age of gestures to use of speech, to creation of writing, to the age to print, to growth of electronics, and finally to the information age. With each passing stage, the role of media to its transformation to mass media has gone beyond simple transmission and functioning as a neutral process, to that of a spreading of shared meanings that society associates themselves with. In this sense, mass media is an instrument or more, so a process of creating shared meanings that people can identify with, that equips people with the vocabulary and information to engage in a conversation and dialogue. Thus, the media is not just about answering a community's need for information, it is as much about constituting that community. Media representation thus denote how these mass media content deal with depict and portrays specific groups, communities, ideas, experiences, values, issues and topics, etc. to a larger mass audience. The purpose or function of the content could vary from transmitting information for purpose of surveillance, such as dangers of ecological disasters, floods, droughts, tsunami, earthquakes, epidemics, dengue, Zika, Ebola, H1N1 virus, news about economy, stock market or political situation, election trials, fostering community sentiments by dramatizing deviants such as youth, crime, sex, offenders, etc. There is thus an act of resembling wherein the representation becomes a medium, and because of its ability to be copied, the representation becomes more accessible to be communicated on a mass level. It involves how language and systems of knowledge production selects, breaks down, reconstructs and finally circulate meanings which may be highly selective at times. Representation of sickness. Several research work has concluded that mass media remains the most important and influential primary source of public information on illness and issues of health and fitness. Building public opinion on a myriad of health-related issues through mass media has proven to be highly effective. For instance, local health system and non-governmental organizations frequently highlight on sickness caused by bacterial diseases such as malaria, dysentery, cholera, typhoid, etc. through newspaper adverts or on billboards across the cities, towns and villages. What needs long-term commitment and affects equal numbers of individuals are chronic conditions, which includes a vast range of sickness caused by cardiovascular conditions, cancer, diabetes, HIV/AIDS, substance addiction, muscular and joint illness, epilepsy, obesity, etc. These are sicknesses which have substantial representation. For example, cancer is a recurring theme in movies and television shows. The effects of diabetes, cardiovascular conditions and its prevention are constantly highlighted through fitness campaigns for healthy diet, organic food products, etc. Although depiction of HIV/AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases have increased, there is still a great deal of stigma and discrimination. Mass media have shown the trend to generalize by emphasizing the risk to a particular age group or strata, sex or sexual orientation, income group, etc., thus leading to victim shaming as opposed to focusing on the behaviors patterns of individuals which pose the greater risk. Serious sickness such as cancer has received a fair deal of media coverage, but again, the case of misrepresentation is also highest here. Critics have noted how patients are often shown as feisty, almost healthy, etc., when in fact the process is mostly the opposite. The fact that there are very few medical dramas on television network which have sustained long audience support, the tendency of media to focus on one dimension of sickness. Mental sickness has often been portrayed in poor light, because of which we see those actually affected are shunned away from society, locked in mental institution and are given high medications. It is often shown as a case for violence, unpredictability such as schizophrenia as a reason for social inefficiency in case of ADHD, OCD, etc. On the other hand, depression, which is a very serious and common mental sickness, is instead not given its due focus as a disease, despite being mentioned commonly. When it is mentioned that everyone gets depressed, it is showing that depression is not accepted as a disease. In fact, the serious consequence of this is that today people are afraid to even mention that they have it simply because one would not fully understand like they would understand a physical illness. Thus, the inaccuracy of health information as it appears in media has long been a concern of advocates of such sickness, as imprecise information and commercial messages affect consumer behavior by decreasing the urgency with which we act to prevent and detect such conditions. Representation of later life. Because of a strong culture of ageism, the process of growing old is not always represented positively by the media. In case of advertisements, images of older men and women on the cover of lifestyle fashion magazines or in television adverts are few. We find that most magazines and adverts collectively presents a slim, fit, wrinkle-free, youthful image that is impossible to maintain in the entire course of life. With many adverts for anti-aging products, it promotes aging as something to be challenged or, if possible, reversed. The heightened use of digital manipulation to make any signs of aging invisible makes this even more evident. Dove, a global personal care brand, challenged those beliefs through its award-winning campaign for real beauty. On the other hand, there are advertisement campaigns that demonstrate and portray older adults as super seniors who are healthy, wealthy and defying aging, who are keeping up with technology, wants to consume the same products as youth, etc. Thus, absent in the mass media are portrayals of a balanced notion of aging, one that reflect both the challenges and difficulties of getting older while accepting the experiences connected with aging. One common theme is when elders are commonly characterized as sweet, vulnerable and warm, who are incompetent and deserves the sympathy and compassion. News stories that feature older people as crime victims are an extension of an image of vulnerable group who are in need of charity protection as they are defenseless on their own. Whereas those who defy such negative stereotypes are depicted as strange, funny and comical, trying to be hip and cool, etc. On television dramas and cinema, older characters appear less frequently and in less prominent roles than other adult characters, which are predominantly portrayed as emotionally, physically and mentally healthy. Instead, older characters talk about age, linking it to death, a disheartening process. Thus, aging individuals are typecast on the basis of generalization about declining health, happiness and attractiveness. Negative portrayals far outweigh positive portrayals, and most advertisements target pension and insurance related issues. But rarely do we see media discussing other disabilities. This lack of representation in the mass media may contribute to marginalizing older adults and also the way older adults see themselves. Thus, stating from WHO World Report on Aging and Health 2015. And some of this prejudice arises from observable biological declines. This so-called objective starting point for the stereotypes of older age may be distorted by awareness of disorders such as dementia, which may be mistakenly thought to reflect normal aging. Furthermore, because ageism is assumed to be based on these presumed physiological and psychological facts, little or no account is taken of the less obvious adaptations made by older people to minimize the effects of age-related loss, nor the positive aspects of aging. The personal growth that can occur during this period of life and the contributions made by older people. This socially ingrained ageism can become self-fulfilling by promoting in older people stereotypes of social isolation, physical and cognitive decline, lack of physical activity and economic burden. Conclusion. Therefore, you learned that in new socio-cultural contexts, individuals are constantly appropriating media to elaborate on their physical and mental situation. This is especially true in case fast evolving social media where the content caters to individual at the center. The participatory nature of social media have transformed media to a more active one with a wider audience reach. Millions of forums and channels exist online where debates and discussions are encouraged. However, it has also increased the vulnerability of those who are sick to abuse and harshness. Although it is exaggerated, the fact is that growing old is also accompanied by a rising incidence of disease and disability. I hope at the end of this lecture you have learned that to alter the experience of later life and sickness in our societies, negative stereotypes needs to give way to realistic portrayals. Misrepresentation and underrepresentation of diversity should stop, so that such portrayals cover the variety of experiences without attaching a value judgment. The fact is that by overlooking the diversity of experience and with media highlighting the similarities instead of diversity, the policymakers tend to create legislations and welfare schemes that will never address these issues in all its complexities. The visibility will send a strong message reinforcing the fact that sickness needs to be addressed by society as a whole, and that aging is a natural process and an older adult are part of the societal fabric. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the module carefully and attempt the questions at the end. Thank you.